Okay.
All right, thank you everyone for joining us for this, our final workshop session of the day for our Ag and Food Conference. We are excited to still have you with us today for this, what should be a really, really exciting conversation and an insightful conversation. We're discussing farmer mental health and a lot of the resources. And sorry, Melissa, can you go back to the opening slide so I can just work them in order?
Sorry.
No worries.
Oh, I didn't realize I skipped it.
All good. So before we jump into our workshop and our panel conversation, I do want to just touch on some things CMAP related. First, I will say my name is James Lehner. I'm the Communications and Outreach Coordinator at CMAP. And so that's my role. And then I'll start with our working equity statement. So CMAP has recently begun the important and ongoing work of identifying our role in racial justice work. Recognizing that many gaps that currently exist in CMAP's work as it pertains to these issues, we are looking to take a more active role in building an equitable and representative CMAP community. We hope that you will think about today's workshops with a racial justice lens, and on our website, you will find a working equity statement prepared in consultation with CMAP staff, board members, and other ag stakeholders. We encourage your feedback at the link in the chat, which I will drop in there now. You can use this link to provide any input, feedback, thoughts you have on things related to that equity statement. Briefly want to say once more, thank you to our sponsors for this conference. Everything we've been able to pull off today in the lead up to getting this all done wouldn't be doable without them. So thank you to NOFA Mass, to Edible South Shore and South Coast, to the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources and Island Foundation. Their support is what makes all of this possible. And we're very grateful for their help. Really quickly, I know we've been on Zoom all day, so this probably is and we've been on Zoom for a long time generally, so I'm sure we're all pretty comfortable with this, but as some reminders, our tech support staff for this call is Melissa. If you have any tech questions, send her a message. She'll be able to help with those. Just really quickly, make sure your name is correct, and if you feel comfortable, add your pronouns onto your profile name. Make sure to stay muted during our conversation and presentation, but feel free to stay on video. Helps us feel like we're all face-to-face and having a real conversation, even if we're not together per se, as we may like to be. You can use the chat function throughout this workshop to ask any questions, network with other participants, share resources, offer comments you have, to engage with the workshop and engage with the conversation. We really want to make this as engaging across our platform as possible. And if you'd like to come off mute to share something and ask a question out loud, please try to use the raise hand feature, which is available as a reaction under that little reactions tab shown in that graphic. You can use that, lets us know that you want to come off mute to say something, and we'll be happy to do that and allow that as an option for you. Now I would like to introduce the folks you'll be hearing from for the rest of this workshop. This is less about me and more about what they're going to say as we go forward. So first, I'm going to lead with our moderator. Ashley Randall is the Policy and Legislative Director and Deputy Commissioner of MDAR. She previously worked for the Northeast Dairy Producers Association and is a licensed attorney. Deputy Commissioner Randall grew up on a fourth-generation dairy farm in South Deerfield. She's been instrumental in MDAR's new focus on farmer mental health resources and training. And so welcome and thank you for your time to Ashley. And joining Ashley on the panel, we have Polly Shyka and Rachel Van Boven. At this point now, I will turn it over to our panel and our moderator to take us into the real meat of our program.
Thank you, James, and good afternoon, everyone. I have the distinct pleasure of moderating today's panel and being joined by Polly and Rachel for what should be a very interesting discussion and insightful discussion around mental health resources for the farming community. As James had mentioned, at the department, we are in the process of establishing a farmer mental health program through a $500,000 award that we received through the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network. This is a new opportunity for the department and for Massachusetts. And throughout that process, we look forward to providing trainings for our ag stakeholders across the state. And now turning it over to our panelists, I'd like to first introduce Polly Shyka, who is with the Maine Farmer Resource Network and Village Side Farm. for Polly's presentation and brief introduction.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashley. Yeah, this is Polly, and I've been an organic vegetable and seedling farmer for my whole adult life. I live in Freedom, Maine, which is on unceded Wabanaki territory. I grew up about an hour north of here, so really grateful also to be in this space with a different hat on. I work for for several different overlapping groups. One of them is FarSan Northeast, and here on the slide you see our mission. And to be clear, the federal government, the USDA and NIFA sort of sent the farm and ranch stress assistance world in a little curveball, because there are the state projects that Ashley spoke to, that each state was offered a $500,000 one-time grant. Excuse me, I have a little tickle. Sorry, I meant to mute myself too. That was rude. But NIFA also offered, also sponsored 3 years ago, the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network Northeast. So that is a collaborative effort, and that's the group that I work for. I also work on our Maine state project. So just so there's not confusion, you are all welcome to look into FarSan Northeast's mission. It's here on the slide. We're building an inclusive network of service providers dedicated to advancing the mental, emotional, social, and financial well-being of agricultural producers, workers, and their families. So through innovative, accessible, and effective mental health care and stress assistance programs. The network relies on peer-to-peer knowledge and shared learning to prioritize timely, culturally competent, and farmer and farm worker informed resources that support thriving communities in the Northeast. Next slide, please. So like any mission statement, that has a lot in it. We have 11 values associated with our mission and vision. I really welcome you to visit FarSan Northeast's landing page, and we'll share that link in a little bit. But to just stay with the slides here, the FarSan Northeast was funded in the 2018 Farm Bill, and really was launched a pilot year in 2019, and then in 2020 we really got off the ground. FarSan Northeast is one of 4 FarSans in the United States. We're the 13 states in the Northeast. There's a Southern, there's a Western, and there's a Midwestern, I believe. And our focus, next slide, please. I'll come back to this one actually. Our focus is really around, we're a collaborative effort. Most of the other FarSans monies were given directly to extensions, which is sort of the normal funding model for USDA. But we are a collaboration of organizations. So National Young Farmers Coalition is the lead PI on this grant. Farm First Vermont is involved, FarmAid, where Rachel works, University of Maine Cooperative Extension, that's my home organization, Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, and Migrant Clinicians Network. Next slide, please. We are really working very diligently and very beautifully, I think, to make sure we recognize that often agricultural spaces are bilingual spaces. So much of the food, as many of us probably know, that's harvested in our country is harvested by migrant workers, by Black and brown hands. And this is really important to make sure that our commitment to multilingual spaces follows our network goals here. So next slide, please. This is a slide from Nefolk Land Trust. FarSan Northeast is unique in that its goals and values are really reflecting the reality of systemic stresses that operate in the farm system. So this is a slide from Nefolk Land Trust that really just speaks to that white landowners currently control between 95 and 98% of the farmland, and that we're actively working to address land access issues also within our mission and vision and values. Next slide, please. So here are some of the activities that FarSam Northeast is engaged in as a network. And if any of you are involved in the Massachusetts state FarSam work, all of these FarSam Northeast activities, we hope to, combine and dovetail with all the state efforts. So we offer quarterly calls. We have an internal platform, which is sort of like a social media space, not really social, more of a workspace. We have that's my timer. We have a farmer advisory board because we are farmer and farm worker informed and focused. And we work on a cohort model, which is basically cohorts or communities of practice that come together around certain issues, geography, or affinity groups. We look to, in FarSam Northeast, expand resources and also enhance capacity. So we also, like Ashley was saying, we offer trainings on mental health, stress, and also those structural issues that I spoke to earlier. And we have done some farmer listening sessions. That's really exciting data that's come out of this grant. I think I'm going to skip this slide, please. And on to Rachel as my time's up. I think that slide was, we all know a lot of the stresses on farms. So passing over to Rachel, thank you.
Thanks, Polly. So I'm Rachel. Just a little bit about my personal background. I was a teacher for 15 years, an elementary school teacher, and made a transition, trained to be a farmer, and also trained to be a chaplain. And now I work on the FarmAid Farmer Hotline, which is a great combination of both of those trainings. Also, I come from a long line of farmers. I have an uncle. I'm located in Washington State in the northwest corner, and have an uncle who's running one of the few remaining small dairy farms in our county. That was passed on to him from my grandpa. So, and a brother who's a farmer too. So a lot of friends and family who are farmers. It's been a world I've been adjacent to and in my whole life. So I work for the Farmer Hotline, and FarmAid has kind of two things that we do. We raise money through a concert, and we grant that money out to nonprofit organizations all over the country that are supporting farmers. And then we also run this hotline that farmers can call, or anyone can call. We get calls from community members, farmer family members, people in universities that want to understand and more about farm stress, and farmers anywhere from beginning farmers who are like, I want to get started with farming, to farmers who are having a crisis and might lose the family farm. So, and everything in between. Yeah, I think that's it. Next slide. So this is a visual representation of what the hotline is. We are at the top, the first responder. The farmer you can see in the center is saying something's not right. Who can I reach out to? And they can reach out to the hotline. And we can then connect them with resources. So legal resources, if that's what they need, technical support, connection with mental health care or physical health care, all sorts of different resources. Our job on the hotline is to keep track of all the resources to the best of our knowledge and connect farmers with those. Ideally local resources, because often the local resources know a lot more than we do. Next slide. This is just a brief overview of why farmers call. There's overlap between these, so farmers can call for several reasons, but you can see that the largest reason farmers call is looking for funding opportunities. And this is, I'm sure everyone knows that is a huge source of stress for farmers, is financial stress. So like I said, it's often very overlapping, that the legal issues, financial issues, farm stress, they're calling for all those reasons. Next slide. We also have a Farmer Resource Network, which is a clearinghouse where farmers or anyone can enter, can say, I'm a farmer, I'm located in Massachusetts, and I'm looking for information on disaster relief and resilience, or a whole list of options, and they'll get a list of resources. So this is a good resource for farmers who don't want to talk to us on the phone or want to email us and just want to do it themselves. And then I'm also working with the NIFA FRCN project, but for the Western region, because I'm in Washington State. So we also, and that project is called RASAP, and we have a clearinghouse there for Western specific resources. So we're working on keeping these up to date and building them up. Next slide. So these are just a few of the things that they're working on, that RASAP is working on, that's very similar to what Northeast FRCN is working on. We're offering trainings to the community to help them feel more empowered to speak with farmers who are experiencing mental health crises. So one of those common training is called QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer. And it's kind of summarized there in that image, that ask, keep them safe, and be there. All ways to feel more comfortable for communities to all come together and support farmers who are who might be experiencing mental health crises. There's also a free training. There's in parts of the West, they're building up a peer assistance network. A lot of different states have voucher systems for farmers to access mental health care. So there's a lot of different, because of this large funding that's coming from the federal government all over the country, there's a lot of really interesting direct service resources for farmers that are popping up, and a lot of interesting models. So we're keeping track of all of those. And that's it.
Great, thank you, Rachel and Polly. And I do think it's safe to say that with the virtual conference setting, we're very fortunate to have two panelists from both sides of the country, having Maine and Washington represented today. And recognizing that the topography and geography may be different in those two states, I think a lot of the similarities in terms of stressors on the farm community are shared across the country. And just given the farming environment in recent years, and then the added impacts and stressors of the pandemic, what trends have both of you noticed in the farm and ag community regarding mental health? And Rachel, if you'd like to start.
Sure. I think it's heartening to see an increased conversation about it. I think it's driven a lot by this funding that's going out to the State Department of Ags and the larger FRCN groups. There was a recent poll that the Farm Bureau found that there's less stigma around talking about mental health issues in farm communities. It's still greater than 50% of people feel that there is some stigma in talking about it, but I think there's a lot of effort going on right now, and it's starting to go down. I'd also say that with the pandemic, that's a huge stress that's been added, that's out of the control of the farmers. But one of the benefits of it is that telehealth is more accessible to farmers. And so, whereas in the past, maybe it was so far to drive to get mental health care, or there was some stigma for being seen going to see a therapist or a counselor, it's much more accessible to access telehealth therapy now. And MSU is, I believe it is Michigan State, but I have a little sheet with links to all these resources, so I'll share that in the chat.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Polly, what are your thoughts?
I agree with everything Rachel said, and a few other ideas that that I see, or I don't have them. I've just witnessed them. Are just mutual aid initiatives. There are so many more sort of GoFundMe's, and people are reaching out and asking for help when they're struggling, and they might not be asking for mental health care, but asking for help. We know from Rachel's brief presentation there that asking for help or being asked, do you need help, is really one of the steps in destigmatizing and bringing a mental health challenge or a particular stress to the surface. So I see a lot of hope in the mutual aid form for farm communities. I certainly see a lot more articles, workshops, podcasts, podcast episodes that really name stress, resilience, support, outside of these traditional stressors. Like, not that they're not any smaller, but they're just, I think that just putting the words stress, resilience, support into the airwaves in an article is a change, and I think it's really just a part of the puzzle, a part of the destigmatizing, normalizing. Certainly, social media posts seem to be becoming more, open and revealing to us. For some people, they're willing to share a struggle in what feels like a sort of a community space, like a social media group. So.
And just continuing off of Rachel's comment about the resources that are available now, we've really seen those expand greatly. But what have you seen in terms of changes in the issues that you might be hearing on the hotline, or that farmers are reaching out about, either from a personal or professional experiences? What have those changes been that you've seen?
Rachel, you want to start?
Sure. I think that one of the things that we try to think about is the teasing out the difference between what people can control and what they can't control. And it feels like there's a lot of stressors that are beyond the control of farmers that are happening. Extreme weather events, we're hearing a lot throughout the country. From that, obviously, COVID had a huge impact on farmers. So, and one thing we hear a lot about that is kind of in between what can we control and can't we control is this consolidation of farmland into corporate hands. So this is something that requires organization among farmers to have a push for it. It's not completely out of our control, like these extreme weather events. So those are things that we've been hearing about a lot on the hotline. Polly?
Thanks. Yeah, this is Polly. So, I mean, I see the impact of mental health challenges in our community really having a ripple effect. I think when farmers, when farm workers, when farm adjacent folks are feeling the stress from either out of control, issues like climate change or systemic racism, I think that that ripples out through the farm community. So, I think that overwork and burnout are issues that always come up in my circle of colleagues. I think personnel and staffing, especially in these COVID times, and has been really, really stressful for folks. So that seems like a change to me. To your question, what issues have changed over time? I think the whole issue of sick days, farmers, I think, at least myself as a farm business owner and employer, I can feel kind of bad when I don't have when I didn't budget for like sick days for my crew, my business plan doesn't involve those kind of benefits of other sectors of of our society. So that's an ongoing stress for me as a farm owner. I think we always talk about just the profit margins, that farming is it's a hard way to make a living. It's a hard way to build a business that employs people over a long term. And I think the last thing I'd say is just that I think that sort of the chronic farm stress, which maybe has been present for decades and decades, but exacerbated certainly by COVID. I think that kind of chronic stress in an industry does have a chilling effect on entrepreneurship, and then rippling one level out to rural businesses, because farmers, we know, small farmers in particular, are huge supporters of local hardware stores and local feed stores and tractor stores. So it really it ripples out.
Thank you, Polly. And just to follow up on something that you mentioned as a farm owner and employer, many of our farms across the country are multi-generational or family owned and operated. And with that, we know there can sometimes be conflict or tension that occurs between owners on the farm. And I was just wondering, and I'll start with you, Polly, if there's any strategies that you've seen to be effective in terms of managing conflict between partners.
Yeah, I mean, this is really huge. And I have seen also more, research being done on this, offerings being done on communication. But, one of the first things that I say to people is you have to prioritize the time to talk. If you can't prioritize the time to talk, that actually talking is a form of working, especially when you're trying to come together and support the business or support a coworker or make a plan for your business. Like, talking is working too. So really prioritizing, being comfortable to see that management activity as a very high priority. I talk about, the sort of three-legged stool of, I think a lot of farmers get into, at least I'll speak for myself, I got into farming because I wanted to grow good food. So that people really focus, I think, first on like this production capacity, this production intelligence and skills and expertise. And then as I got more skilled in producing food, I then started realizing I have to make a living at this. If I want to really do this for the rest of my life, then I add the stool of the financial piece, right? So I have the production piece down. I've added a financial know-how. So now I'm becoming like a business owner, and I'm thinking about finances and spreadsheets and things. And then thirdly and lastly, really, unfortunately, is this relational piece. So to your question about stress and conflict, I really see that all three of those systems, essentially, we have production systems, we have financial systems, and I think we need relational systems on farms that really can support, especially farm home businesses, especially businesses run often by couples or families or multi-generational, like you said. I'll just finally say the last thing is, in Maine, we have a farm coaching program, which has been hugely successful. We've, I think, worked with over 20 farm teams in the last couple of years, where we talk about roles and responsibilities, speaking needs into the farm space, active listening. We use tools like Atina Diffley's criteria screen. So there are a lot of tools out there, and it is really an exciting piece of work, I think, if you want to improve that system.
Thank you, Polly. Rachel, any insights on your end?
What Polly said is so great. And the University of Maine, their extension, they have some wonderful publications on how to run a family meeting and these like lists of questions, and it talks, like communication being so important for this, and communicating, each person communicating their desires and needs, and is who's good at organization, who's good at being with people, and having these conversations and circling back to the conversations so that your roles are clear and meeting the needs of everyone in the family. And also making time, I think, for other roles that you have. So like maybe you're in business together, but making time to have time to just be husband and partners, or husband and husband, or husband and wife, or or just to be a parent with your child, and making sure that you're creating time and space to live into different roles outside of the farm, or being a member of a spiritual community, or another type of community outside of the business. That it's a balance is something that we talk a lot about with, because farming can take over. It's a lot of work that I don't think a lot of other jobs can take over your life in the way that farming can. And so it takes a lot more intentionality and communication to find that balance.
Thank you, Rachel. And something that you'd mentioned earlier in the conversation that I just wanted to go back to is the stigma around accessing mental health resources, and knowing that our farming community is full of pride for the great work that they do. How do we reach farmers and remove that stigma? And maybe you have some strategies or tools. I know you touched upon those at the beginning, but just talking about that a little bit more, if you'd like to start, Rachel, and then we'll go to you, Polly, about those tools to remove the stigma around accessing mental health resources.
Yeah, one thing was pretty excited about was there's a beginning farmer training program here, and they talked about they did a whole module on risk management, and part of talking about risk management on the farm was talking about stress management. And I think those kinds of conversations that normalize stress management as part of risk management are so helpful. And to talk about physical health, we can all agree that if you have a broken arm, it's you want to go see a healthcare provider to get it taken care of, and understanding that mental health is just as key and just as important as physical health. And not taking care of mental health can lead to physical ailments, but if you're not sleeping for 3 days because you're so anxious, it's going to really impact how you're making decisions and what's going on the farm. And that's just as big of an impact as having a broken leg. So those kinds of conversations, I think, work to normalize it as just another part of your health, and that the farmer's health is the key for making the farm healthy.
Great point. Polly, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Rachel. Again, I would add to that. I think that peer-to-peer networks are sort of an up and coming, or maybe they're pretty original, the Granges and things like that. But I think peer-to-peer networks are coming back in farming communities, like the willingness to really be there for other farmers is a strategy that I think can help farmers just access people who know what they're going through, which is also always very important. I think farmers often, I've heard from farmers that when sometimes, and we've experienced this actually, my husband and I with our couples therapist, that all people don't really understand that. I think being told by a therapist, well, if it's so stressful, just don't farm. But that's not really very helpful sometimes. So, or, oftentimes that's not really very helpful. So, I do think that a peer-to-peer networking model, having, colleagues and people who really know, what you're holding and the stresses that you see on a day-to-day is a really promising tool. I think farming conferences like this one are ways to to just further seed this concept, bring visibility to farm stress and the need to address it in community is really important. That decreases isolation and shame and just generally destigmatizes the issue. And I think lastly, I look to sports heroes. I hate to celebrate anybody's mental health challenges, but I think when like Naomi Osaka or Simone Biles put out to the world that they were struggling, I look to people like that as just guiding lights. So I think the bigger cultural conversation is really inspiring to me to in terms of removing stigma over the long haul. I think we're going in the right direction is what I see.
And you mentioned something, Polly, that kind of connects to my next question when we talk about social isolation and knowing that the farming community is a very social group traditionally, attending conferences, ag trade shows, networking and sharing ideas with one another. I think it's safe to say over the last 2 years, going to a virtual platform has been helpful to connect with individuals, but it doesn't have the same nature as connecting in person with your peers. And so I was just wondering how social isolation has impacted members of the farming community in recent years and what you've seen really in the last 2 years with the pandemic and how that's changed for the outreach organizations do.
Boy, it's a great question. I think with less connection, which certainly was prevalent early in the pandemic, just everyone went in their bubbles. I think that, we see that, of course, resiliency, I don't have a working definition of resiliency, but when we think about the concept of resiliency, we know that it has, it's sort of a multi-pronged, combinational idea. So things that add to resiliency, things like family support and important friendships and mentors that are key players in your life, healthy activities, having habits and hobbies, having a spiritual practice or a spiritual community, and then just physical health. Those are all, and mental health are all factors in a person's resiliency. So when something like the pandemic happens, what I think we see is just many of those get really out of whack, right? We lose access to family support and friendships and those, hiking dates or ice skating dates or whatever that farmers are doing to kind of connect and ground in ground their resiliency practices. So that's what I see as the big one, is just the lack of connection really led to sort of and then a global pandemic in and of itself is a big challenge to resiliency. We're all having to be resilient in many different ways that we never had to be. So that's what comes to mind for me, Ashley.
Thank you, Polly. Rachel, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Polly said is so true. We're all struggling with this with the pandemic, and if there was an easy answer, I think we'd all be jumping up and down for joy. Isolation as just not being able to attend church and not being able to go to the coffee shop and connect with your neighborhood farmers has had a really big impact. And there's a lot of work, I think, to find solutions, but I think there's a lot more work to be done too. And one thing around the isolation that farmers are experiencing that I think is a more long-term thing, is the, this consolidation of farms. So there can be, like, we've heard stories of, like a road that there once were like 10 family farms on this road, and they were all taking care of each other. And then there was this consolidation that's slowly happening so that there's just 1 or 2 family farms left, and the rest of the farmland is owned by a corporate entity or something, that isn't in that community. So that's just another thing that's happening, and to be aware of, and for the organizing that's happening amongst farmers and farm organizations to fight corporate takeover of farms, corporate consolidation of farms. I don't think anyone would be surprised that someone from FarmAid would talk about that. So, yeah. But I do think the organizing around the larger issues is one way to fight the isolation. So the consolidation, the histories of discrimination against farmers, all of those are ways to organize. And, it might not have an immediate effect, but the power of connection and the power of community can really bring hope, I think, to know that there are other people that are seeing this and are joining you in the work to bring justice can be a very powerful thing, just the act of it itself.
Very well said. And just looking at the time and knowing that we want to leave enough time for Q&A at the end, I'll just ask one more question for both of you. How do you care for or consider your own mental and emotional health? And I think you both just touched on that a little bit in our discussion, but I think the techniques or resources that you might be able to recommend from a personal standpoint would also be helpful for our attendees to hear. Polly, if you'd like to start.
Certainly, thank you. Many years ago, I saw Atina Diffley at a MAFGA, Maine Farmers and Gardeners conference. And she had this concept of the daily vitamin activity that really stuck with me. And that would be my sort of best gem is, articulate 1 or 3 or 5, I don't know how many you have, daily vitamins. And by that, the invitation is like, I really need alone time every day. If I don't get alone time, I'm a wreck. So I have to make sure I give myself that vitamin every day. And best case scenario is it happens in the morning, right? Because we know that those habits we want, that if we give them to our selves in the morning, or then we can kind of go through the day in a more like, check, I did that. I went for my walk, or, I had my coffee and sat with my planner, or I sat with my journal, or whatever your daily vitamin is, to really find your daily vitamin, and then, just give yourself a dose of that as often as you can. That's really something that stuck with me.
That's great. Thank you. Rachel?
I love that, Polly. Thanks. I did in this this list of resources, there's a few at the bottom that have along the lines of what Polly was talking about, just lists of different things that you can look at that to take care of your mental health, your spiritual health, your physical health, and kind of like taking time to look at those lists and pick out the ones that resonate with you is I enjoy looking at them. It's really, it's regularly to remind myself of like, oh yeah, actually I haven't taken a nap in the sunshine in a while, obviously. But yeah, for my mental health, walking is super important, and working on the hotline can be very stressful sometimes because we get crisis calls occasionally. So I have a routine for after a call. I get up, I go make myself tea, and part of the making myself tea is checking in with myself, do I need caffeinated tea, or do I need chamomile tea to calm myself down? And so the regular check-ins is part of my own mental health, and definitely support from professionals, therapy, and talking to talking to my doctor. I've, over the course of my life, that's been really life-changing, completely life-changing. And spiritual practice is a really crucial thing for me too, to just to have a moment each week to quiet down and realign with my values, and whatever that looks like for everyone else. It looks differently for everyone, but yeah, those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you both. And I can just weigh in as well and say that with our daily lives being thrown out of whack and the usual over the last 2 years, for me, having a routine has always been very important. And trying to maintain that routine was difficult, especially early on in the pandemic. And with my family's farm being just over an hour from where I live, I found that every Sunday going to the farm and working beside my parents and cleaning pens and finding a new appreciation for that was really therapeutic for me. And then ending the day with Sunday dinner together, to just have that to look forward to at the end of every week and before the next work week started, was something that I've continued on. And it's just been very therapeutic, I think, not only for me, but also for my family as well, because it's something we've all come to look forward to. So finding those moments where we can connect and do so in a safe way, especially early on in the pandemic, was really helpful to me. And with that, I want to make sure we do have enough time for Q&A. So I'd certainly open it up for any questions for our panelists, and also thank Rachel and Polly again. I think this was a very insightful discussion. And as you both mentioned, there's still a lot of work to do in the mental health field, but I also think we've come a long way in the resources that are available for our agricultural community. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to use the chat or raise your hand. And I'll also note that Polly and Rachel both shared some resources in the chat. So those are good resources to access. I'm not seeing any questions. I'll just ask a follow-up question for our panelists as well. What would be the first step for, say, an attendee here today that's looking to access mental health resources? What would you tell them the first step really is?
I think on the hotline, there's definitely, like there's different levels. So if it's a mental health crisis, the key would be getting them connected with professional resources as quickly as possible. If it's more farm stress, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what to do. I think one of the things we've found on the hotline is that talking through it is just so helpful, and having someone to talk with, because sometimes solutions come from the farmer themselves just through talking through it, and also parsing out, like, do you need legal help? Do you need financial counseling? You know, do you need, like, getting to the root of what is causing the stress is often very, very helpful. But again, if it's directly like a mental health issue, connecting them as quickly as possible with professional mental health professionals is key.
This is Polly. I do think that, you know, in our communities, either our work communities, well, I'll just say our work communities or other places where we gather, I do think bringing mental health resources to those spaces is something that we can do. So like, you know, the hotline numbers or local clinics, like in our employee manual, we have the local clinics where and also Maine Mobile Health Partners, the number for Maine Mobile Health Partners, which is a clinic that can provide services, dental services, mental health services to farm workers and farmers. So I think, yeah, providing resources to people around would be, and Rachel spoke to what those resources were. Certainly, if there's an acute situation, that would be a hotline, you know, issue. But I think generally other resources are, you know, clinics, practitioners, and it depends on every person. But a great podcast can go a long way. It really just depends on the issue and your connection to that person.
Thank you. I'm just looking in the chat and I don't see any questions.
Hey there, I have a question. So first of all, I want to say thank you to both of you for and all of you for offering your insights on this topic, because I think it's something that is obviously underneath the surface of the farming world in, you know, in our country, and I'm sure across the globe. Previous, you know, even previous to the recent difficulties of the past couple of years. I was just thinking about, you know, something that you had both touched on, and something that I was immediately thinking about, you know, the unique stresses that exist for farmers. And oftentimes they're stresses that can't really be understood unless you have experienced this crazy world at times. And you know, the first thing that popped in my head was obviously like group work, you know, peer-to-peer, like that, amazing, makes total sense. And I know there's also limitations to that sometimes. I'm wondering, just in terms of, you know, working with clinicians or, you know, working with professionals, if there's been any sort of efforts made to connect with professionals that may have had, you know, ag experience themselves, or, you know, just exposure through their own life circumstances. And, you know, especially with telehealth being a thing now, if there's like some kind of a registry that could be made of those kind of professionals, so that people can be connected with people who are both professionally trained, but also, you know, maybe have more of an ability to understand where some of these unique stresses are coming from.
Absolutely. I'll start. Thank you so much for that observation and question. Yeah, for, you know, different states have different sort of rosters of mental health providers. Like I know in Vermont, they have sort of an established roster of folks who routinely work with farmers. So I look to Vermont as a really exciting model. The Farm First program there, they're also doing peer-to-peer. They're paying farmers to be trained in peer-to-peer, and that's open to other farmers outside of Vermont. So, you know, if you or other people on the call are interested in that, that's Farm First Vermont. So I think, you know, those are a couple of ideas that come to mind. In Maine, we are planning on doing like an Ag 101 training for social workers and clinicians and therapists. So really putting together a training where, you know, some farmers talk about their experiences with mental health providers and what really works and what doesn't. So really hearing from a farmer, I think, is always really important, and not just sort of like, I think oftentimes Ag 101 trainings I've seen as more of like an alphabet soup, like, oh, here's what the USDA is, and here's what, this in Maine, I'm just thinking like coastal enterprises, like different groups do different things in every state. And so rather than Ag 101 training and just what are the entities at play, what are the organizations at play, actually hearing from farmers, like what really, what are the stresses, what does work for them in being seen and validated and held. To me, a big one, honestly, is like being seen as a professional. So many people say like farmers, it's a lifestyle. And I sort of take that with a little bit of concern, or sometimes I can feel like, well, I'm really a professional. Farmers are professionals. We are experts across multiple skill sets. So that's one that's sort of a personal pet peeve or thing that I would say in an Ag 101 training is this is a lifestyle, and it's absolutely a profession that really needs to be seen as such by clinicians. So thanks for that question.
I think Polly's really the expert for the Northeast on the answer to that. There are some really awesome models happening across the country. I just talked to someone at Ohio State University, and they're doing specific ag specific trainings for therapists, where they can get CEUs, and then they'll go into a roster of people who've been specifically trained to work with agricultural producers. And someone in Colorado is working on that as well, getting that started for the West. I think FRCN Northeast, there's a link to how to get the email to get hooked into the network is in that link that I put in the chat. And that's a good way to find out about the more direct service. But one thing we talk about is just how valuable offering more services directly to farmers is, like someone who they can sit down with and talk through their financials with, and direct legal support, and not as much the like lists of, which I shared, a list of resources, but just being able to talk one-on-one with someone is the most valuable, I think. So the more these systems are moving towards that, the better, in my opinion.
I think the whole topic of accessibility and making sure that we have those resources available, whether it's literally at the farm gate or the virtual farm gate for our farming community, is really important. And I think you highlighted this as well, Polly, about multilingual resources and having those and really meeting people where they are to ensure that we are reaching all individuals across the farming and ag space. And I think there's a lot of great work going on that front. I think we have time for one more question. If there's any more questions or any closing comments from our panelists today. I don't see any more questions or hands raised. Polly or Rachel, would you like to offer any final thoughts before we close the webinar?
This is Polly. I just want to say thank you so much for being here. I think the more we bring these conversations to all the spaces that we sit in, the more life-affirming sort of offerings we can bring to the world. And by life-affirming, I mean, like you said, equitable, inclusive, broad ranging, and really thoughtful and farmer centered and farm worker centered offerings. So thank you for being here. I'll put my email address in the chat. I welcome any questions or ideas, feedback, anything.
Thank you, Polly. Rachel?
Yeah, I also want to say thank you so much for highlighting this work at the CMAP conference. The more we can talk about it, the better for destigmatizing and creating more health for our farming community. So thank you for having us. And if anyone who's here has any questions, I'll put my email in the chat as well, or you can call the hotline really with any question at all. And we are open until 10 p.m. Monday through Friday. So thank you.
Well, I'd like to take the opportunity as well to thank CMAP for organizing this panel. I think it's a very timely topic and a very important topic. I'd really like to thank Rachel and Polly for all of the insights they shared today and for being a wealth of information and resources to the farming community. And I'd also like to thank James and Melissa for providing the tech support and helping with the logistics today of the webinar. And to all of the attendees, thank you for joining us. This was a great session.
And thank you, Ashley, for moderating and facilitating.
Yes, thank you again to Ashley for moderating, Polly and Rachel for participating in this conversation. This is really important work, obviously, and your insight and your expertise is more than needed and more than welcome. Folks who are still on, please stick around with us. We're going to go back to Zoom room A. I'll put the link in the chat there. We are going to just have one more wrap up as a whole conference group to close out the day. Sorry, as I get this link into the chat. We'll be talking about wrapping up our day. We'll be talking some CMAP work that we do beyond the conference, including announcing our TIE award recipients, looking ahead to some future events, and there'll be some room for conversation specifically geared towards beginning farmers with some questions we have that we were hoping to address earlier before the delayed keynote that sort of threw our clocks off a little bit to get through today. But thank you all for joining us again. Again, Zoom room A will be open. CMAP, we really want to keep these conversations from today going. This isn't just about one day to talk about these things. We're really trying to build that community and keep these conversations throughout the year. And so with that in mind, we have a couple of in-person networking events coming up next month. I guess technically still next month. Yeah, it's just still February. Friday, March 11th from 3 to 5 p.m. we'll have a beginning farmer networking event. That will be at the Bristol Aggie High School in Dighton. This is a great opportunity for anyone with fewer than 10 years of farm management experience. Again, trying to build that network, especially as a community for beginning farmers, trying to get into that community, connect folks with similar perspectives and similar spaces in the process of establishing themselves. And then on Friday, March 18th, the same time, 3 to 5 p.m., we have a direct market farmer networking event. That'll be at the Plymouth County Administration Building in Plymouth and is a great opportunity for anyone selling farm or fish products directly to consumers. Again, all of these trying to keep our farm community and our agricultural producer community together and strong and resilient, sharing in our overall goal in our work and trying to build up something together. The last thing I will drop in the chat here, you've gotten it a few times today, but it really is important, is a link to our survey in regards to the conference. This is a great space for you to provide us with feedback that helps us complete better programming in the future, keep building the conference into something that is even more helpful for farmers and for our food community. We really want to make sure this event and the rest of our year-round programming is as strong as it can be. And it's also really important for us for tracking some of the things that we need to report in our work for grant-related things as well. So that survey link, you've gotten it a few times today, but it really is that important that I've shared it again. If you can do it at some point this afternoon, either now, before the wrap-up, after the wrap-up in the Zoom room, in room A, anytime you get that information is really helpful for us. And we appreciate your feedback and your time throughout the day today and as a whole. I think that's all I have. So once again, thank you to our panelists and to our moderator. It's really been a pleasure to hear you have this conversation. We appreciate your time and everything you've had to share.
Thank you.
Thank you.